My first day moving into student halls, I was greeted by a very friendly guy called Dominic. He was very camp and told me he was gay early in the conversation, but I didn't have a problem with that. He offered to help me unpack my room and then go for a drink with me. Although I thought this was a little overfamiliar, I was delighted that I had made a friend so quickly, and I accepted his offer. He put a tremendous amount of effort in helping me put everything in the appropriate places in my room. We then went for a drink at the student bar. I made a point to tell him that I was straight, as I suspected he might have a bit of a crush on me, hence why he was being so nice. However, he didn't show any signs of dismay, and he continued chatting to me. I liked him a lot. He was very intelligent and interesting to talk to, and I was very pleased that I had a new friend already. I was worried that I would be lonely in my university dorms. He didn't live in the same building as me, he just lived across from it. I was studying creative writing and he was studying business, but we started to hang out a lot. Although I liked Dominic, I did start to find him a little overbearing. He would message me on Facebook all the time and would get upset if I didn't reply, even if it was only for about 5 minutes. He would always want to know what I was doing, and if I disappeared off Facebook for a while, he would want to know where I had been all day. One time, I even sent him a text mentioning that I was on a train, and he texted back, "Why are you on a train? Why am I not invited to wherever you're going?" I was on my way to my part-time job. I made quite a few other friends, and he would always show visible signs of displeasure whenever they were around. And whenever I talked to him about them, he would tell me that he disliked them and that I shouldn't trust them. He was very possessive, and I personally can't stand clingy friends. So I tried to distance myself from him a bit, but the more that I pulled away, the tighter that he held. I still hung out with him and still cared about him, but I was starting to worry about where this friendship was going. I was pretty sure this guy had a crush on me, and soon my suspicions were confirmed. I met this girl at a party that I went to called Anna and asked her out on a date. She accepted. I was really thrilled and I told Dominic about it. The second that I told him, his face fell. "Why are you going on a date with her?" he asked me, sounding very worried. 'Cause I want to," I said. But I'm going to be jealous," he said. "Please don't go, it'll really hurt me. You wouldn't want to hurt me, I'm your best friend." I never actually told him that he was my best friend before, and I found the way that he was acting now both annoying and a little creepy. "I'm sorry, but I told you that I was straight before, Dominic," I said. "We can still be friends, but I'm not going to stop dating just for you." He remained sulky and miserable for the rest of the night. I told myself that he would have to accept it and get over it soon. But when I was on a date with Anna, I kept getting phone calls from unknown numbers. I answered at first, but I couldn't hear anything on the other end. It was just as though someone was listening. I started to ignore the calls, but you would not believe how frequently they were coming in. They were coming in nonstop, and I couldn't even tell the time because they seriously would not stop. I had to put my phone on airplane mode. After about an hour on my phone in airplane mode, I switched airplane mode off, but the very second I did, the calls came in again. Although I was unnerved, I enjoyed my date with Anna, and we agreed to meet up again. When I got home from the date, Dominic was waiting right outside of my dorm, his phone in hand. "How was your date? Do you like her?" he asked, sounding miserable. "Yeah, I do," I told him. "Was that you who kept calling me?" "No," he said, but he was obviously lying. "But anyway, I've been waiting to tell you. I've heard that Anna really gets around. She sleeps around with loads of guys and you should stay away. She'll break your heart." Anna had no mutual connections with Dominic, so I asked him how he could possibly know about this. He just told me that he had done his research. I was angered and told him that it was none of his business and that I would find out for myself. He started crying, saying how he was just worried about me, and he stormed off. I think he was hoping that I would follow him, but I didn't, and went to my room, angry that he would try to interfere with my life like this. I have had crushes on friends before, but if they don't feel the same, I never try to force it. But Dominic only got worse. When I got back to my student room, Dominic had sent me screenshots on Facebook of a conversation he had allegedly had with Anna. The messages showed her boasting to him about how she was using me and how she was planning to break my heart. Obviously, this didn't ring at all true, as one, how would she even know who Dominic was and why would she send messages to him? And two, why would she tell a friend of mine so openly what her plans for me were when he would obviously show me? I demanded that he show me the conversation from Anna on his computer screen with me there, but he told me that he had deleted the conversations because they were just too upsetting for him to read. I knew right then and there that Dominic was deliberately trying to ruin my relationship with Anna through incredibly deceitful and despicable means, and I told him that I wasn't interested in him, that I never would be, and that he better stop right now. He told me that I was being a terrible friend, that all he was doing was trying to look out for me, and that he couldn't believe I was believing a stranger over him. I was seriously pissed off with the way that he was selfishly trying to manipulate me now, and I blocked him on social media. He started sending me constant text messages and calling me nonstop every day, telling me things like he was so depressed over me, that he had started taking drugs and that he was contemplating ending it, basically trying to make me worry. He would also constantly send me messages saying that he knew Anna was cheating on me, and me and her had started dating properly at the time, and I had to come to my senses. He was creeping me out so much that I went to stay with my parents for a bit as I wasn't comfortable living in the same area as him. I had to block his number because the phone calls were so constant. People from my university dorm were sending me angry messages because Dominic had told them a really twisted version of what was going on, making them think that Anna was some dirty girl who I had betrayed him for. It then turned out that he had been lying to everyone, telling them that me and him were in a romantic, sexual relationship, and that I had cheated on him with Anna and then left him for her. I furiously set everyone straight, told them that I had never been in a relationship with Dominic, and that everything he had told them about Anna was complete bullcrap. Most people believed me, although it took a while to convince everyone that Dominic was the liar. He was very manipulative, and although a lot of his lies were ludicrous, he was very good at making himself sound legit. I decided to go back to my university dorm after a while, as it was inconvenient for me to stay at my parents' while at university. Their house was far away from it. I arrived back there quite late, as I really didn't want to run into Dominic. I was so angry about him. I had a new girlfriend and studies to think about, yet because of his obsession and harassment, he was now all I could think about. In a very twisted way, I think this was what he wanted, positively or negatively. He wanted me thinking about him. When I got back, I just lay down on my bed, thinking about what to do when suddenly I hear a smash, and a brick came flying through my window. I jumped a mile and rolled over the side of my bed, hiding there for a moment, thinking it was burglars coming in or something, but nothing more happened. Once I got over the shock, I cautiously stepped over the broken glass and tried to look out of the window, when I got a phone call off a number that I didn't recognize. I answered it, and it was Dominic, and you will not believe what he said. "I just saw Anna throw a brick through your window and run," he shouted. "I told you that she was bad news. You should have listened to me, I told you." You would not believe the rage that I felt. I was so angry that I couldn't even speak for a moment, but then I just exploded. I screamed at him that I knew it was him and I was calling the police right now. He tried to protest, but I hung up on him and immediately called them. When they arrived, Dominic was not in his room, but when it was opened up, A large stash of illegal drugs was found there. The manager of my student halls assured me that he would be getting kicked out for this, and the police said that they would be getting in touch with him. After this, I never saw Dominic again. I changed my phone number and never unblocked him on social media. A couple of times I was tempted to out of sheer curiosity, but decided that it wasn't worth it. I think he dropped out of university, but I don't know exactly what happened to him. My relationship with Anna didn't last. She was never quite clear on why she ended it, but I actually suspect that Dominic's freakish behavior scared her off, even though it wasn't my fault. Well, life goes on. Dominic, I hope whatever issues you're going through, you sort them out. And I hope you find a guy who actually does want to be with you. But please, just leave me alone. A little backstory. My son has been battling cancer for over 2 years. He receives treatments at a hospital nearly 3 hours from our home in a neighboring state. Our only car broke down during this time. Due to financial issues, cancer treatments are expensive, even with insurance. We just couldn't afford to get it fixed or replaced. We were stuck using medical transportation through our insurance to get to and from appointments. Transportation is provided by contracted individuals who use their private vehicles. Most drivers live in our home state. The story involves one of those drivers, and it took place almost a year ago. My son and I were leaving the hospital to return home after a 1-week inpatient stay for chemotherapy. We had problems with the driver that we were assigned to hours in advance of him even showing up. Over an hour after the scheduled pickup time, I called the dispatch to see if we could get to an ETA. They contacted him and told me he was just coming into the city, but because of traffic, he didn't want to give an estimate as to when he would arrive. It's weird, but fine. I figured he would be less than a half an hour away. And so we waited and waited. After another 2 hours of waiting, I called again. This time, he told dispatch that he was just crossing the state line, and he would be at the hospital in about 2 hours. Like what? Needless to say, I was not at all amused. Maybe I was being a little choosy and beggarish, but we were both exhausted and just wanted to get home to the rest of our family. And besides that, the ride was scheduled way in advance. He knew several days ahead of time what time he was supposed to be there. Drivers are supposed to be there waiting at time of discharge. 5 hours later and more than 8.5 hours after our scheduled pickup time, he finally called me to say that he had arrived. By this time, I was beyond irritated with this guy. He had obviously lied to the dispatch more than once. I found out in the first few minutes of meeting him that he lives in the same town that we live in, and it took him 8.5 hours to drive 3 hours. Sure thing. While he was helping put our bags in the trunk and before we even left the hospital parking lot, he had misgendered my son several times. My son has a masculine name. He also very definitely looks like a boy. It honestly felt like he was doing it on purpose. So I corrected him. Kindly even, though I was pissed off at this point. He apologized and told us that he had a massive heart attack a few years ago and had brain damage from a lack of oxygen because he had stopped breathing during the event. He said the brain damage had caused him to sometimes use the wrong words. So I felt a little bad for being mad, but also a little concerned and a little incredulous. I couldn't help but feel like this was a cover story designed to placate and manipulate. I might have become a little bit of a Karen in my thinking towards him at this point. He was chatty, and I was also talking to him. I was being perfectly friendly, even though I wasn't happy with him. After we got on the road to start our 3-hour drive home, he began texting while driving. I told him to stop. He said that he was texting his wife to tell her that he was on his way back home. I said that I didn't care who he was texting. He wasn't going to text and drive with my child in the car. He should have done it before we left the hospital, or he could pull over if it was that important. I wasn't unkind, but I was matter-of-fact about it. He was visibly irritated, but he put his phone down. After that, he would straight up ignore anything I said to him, and he had stopped talking. I gave it a few goes, trying to be friendly and show that I wasn't mad. But he wanted no part of it, so I got on my Kindle and I started to read. A few times, I noticed him slyly slide his phone up onto his leg. It was obvious that he was trying to do this without me noticing. Each time I noticed, I would turn my Kindle off and look out at the road. He would let out an exacerbated sigh and slide his phone back down into the center console. After a few minutes, I would go back to reading. When we finally got back to our house, he didn't even say anything to me when he gave me the logbook to sign. He also didn't get out of the car to help carry our stuff to the house, which is something the driver is supposed to do. I honestly didn't even care about the last part because I just wanted to get away from this guy. It was nearly midnight at this point. Less than a half hour after we got home, I got a text from a blocked number, something that has never happened to me previously. The text was a string of insults and expletives commenting on everything from the quality of my character to my looks. I have no way of proving it, of course, and maybe I was jumping to conclusions, but I felt like this message had come from the driver. Very few people had my phone number, and it was such a short time after our encounter with him ended. It just seemed like the most likely scenario. The following day, my husband convinced me to report the driver for texting while driving. I made no mention of the text while talking to the company because I had no proof that he was the origin. There weren't any further texts at this time. About a week later, an investigator from the transportation company called to get more information about the incident. I told only the facts about what had happened. Once again, I did not mention the text. The investigator told me that the driver would be written up and sent for additional training. The next day, I received another text from a blocked number. This one was full of more personal attacks and colorful language. I don't remember the details because this was nearly a year ago, but there was a vague threat and a mention of messing with someone's livelihood. That last part made me really think the messages were from the driver, especially since the text came a little over 24 hours after the investigator had called me. I figured he had probably just received the reprimand and sent the text in response. But still, I had no proof that it was him, and it was still just a theory on my part. Over the next several days, the texts kept coming in, escalating in tone. I finally decided that it might be time to report them to the police, when the next text left little doubt in my mind as to who was sending them, as it made mention of the report that I made to the transportation company. It also contained less vague threats in it, and mentioned that he stole my address and his GPS. I filed a police report. They investigated. Unfortunately, the text came from an untraceable prepaid phone. I changed my phone number and the text stopped. I also made an additional report to the transportation company, where I provided the text and the police report to the investigator. The police had already been in contact with him, and the company had already let the driver go. We also moved shortly after the last text. Maybe it was silly to do so, but the guy did make some pretty serious threats and he did know where we lived. I know most people are just full of hot air when they make those kind of threats, but we weren't willing to take any chances. There are some very scary people out there. Also, it might have proved to be warranted. Fast forward to the first week in May of this year. While watching the 6 o'clock news, we see a story about a local man who had an altercation with his brother that ended in the brother being stabbed 20 times. The man later passed in the hospital and the brother was wanted for murder. When they showed the name of the brother in his photo, I nearly fell out of my seat. It was the driver. He was apprehended by police by the time the 11 o'clock news had aired. Okay, so this happened a few years ago when I was 12 years old. I have a twin sister and another sister that was 10 at the time. We were in a family vacation in Orlando, and we were staying in a hotel that was minutes from downtown Disney. After having spent the day at Magic Kingdom, we went to downtown Disney, where many elevators were located. We took one. It was around 11 p.m., and this weird guy comes in with a creepy smile on his face. Immediately, my dad tenses up and looks at my mom, who also felt that something was wrong with him for a reason. The guy looks at my younger sister and asks her by her name how was her day and if she liked chocolate. When asked how he knew this, he answered that he overheard our conversation and wanted to be friendly. Weird, but no big deal. Afterwards, we start going back to our hotel and this guy keeps following us, offering us food, drinks, even wanting to offer us a ride to one of the best restaurants in town. And then my dad told him to screw off, but he wouldn't go. At the next street, we waited for the light to turn red and crossed the street running, hoping to leave him behind us. But the guy kept following us. We saw that he took his phone out, called someone, and 5 minutes later, I realized that a car was now following us. My dad is starting to talk about fighting him, but then we reached the hotel finally. Well, not so much. It turns out the guy had a room in our hotel too, and he started to ask us in an almost imploring way to go to his room, that he had cake and he would even pay us if we would come. We then called the security, and while they were verifying the man's identity, we went the heck away to our room. We never saw the man again, but dang, I just can't imagine what would have happened if we went, and what his intentions were. This is quite possibly the stupidest thing that I've ever done in my life. Early 2000s, I was in my late teens and was on my way to meet up with a coworker, Chris, to watch a movie at his apartment. I had been to his apartment once before. It was one of those huge apartment complexes where every single building looks the same. It was set out in a big rectangle, with a field up against it, meaning that there really wasn't any way to differentiate the buildings, except for numbers on them that were only visible during the day. I remembered that the last time I had been there, I had parked next to a huge boat. So I looked for a huge boat and I parked by it again. I texted him to let him know that I was on my way up, and then I went up to the second floor. I didn't bother checking the apartment number, and I banged on the door really hard, yelling, "Open up," in a deep voice. The door cracked open and all I saw was a half a face peeking out at me. Loud music was thumping and the whole apartment looked dark inside. "What do you want?" the guy mumbled. I never even considered that this was the wrong apartment, but I knew Chris had a roommate, and I hadn't met the guy yet, so derp, I thought this was him. I'm here for Chris," I said. "Who?" the guy asked. And then the door opened all the way, and another guy grabbed my arm. "He's right back here," he said, and he pulled me into the apartment. The music was really loud, and the whole place smelled. The lights were out, with a few strobe lights blinking here and there. I just remembered thinking, this doesn't look like his apartment. Did he move some furniture around? The guy who had pulled me into the apartment wouldn't let go of my arm, and he began pulling me towards the back. He grabbed a cup and tried to give it to me, but I wouldn't take it. The place was packed, and everywhere I looked, people were either shooting up or lighting up or snorting up. I was pretty sheltered at the time, so it felt like walking into a movie set. It just didn't feel real. When we had passed the first bedroom, one of the rooms, I saw a group of people sitting around a blacklight doing God knows what, writhing around, dancing, but I smelled blood at that point. The guy was still trying to drag me to what I assumed was the back bedroom, and that's when it hit me. This is the wrong apartment. I'm exceptionally slow-witted, it appears. I pulled my arm out of the guy's grasp but had no idea what to do. I knew if I had panicked, bad things would definitely happen. In a split-second decision, I did what I do best. Acted dumb. "Oh goodness, you know what? This is the wrong apartment," I said in the most cheerful voice. I started to leave, but the guy kept pulling me back. "It's cool," was all that he would say. "Stay." I kept pulling myself away and telling him that I had a friend waiting for me, that I'm so sorry to have bothered him, and it looks like a great party, but I had to go. I tried to keep it lighthearted and not, vomit on myself in panic. My phone started buzzing in my hand, and when that happened, he started trying to grab it from me, all the while telling me to stay. "You're here, now have a good time," he said, trying to pry my phone out of my death grip. And the scary thing about it was that he didn't yell. He didn't speak aggressively at all, though his actions were terrifying. I finally made it to the door and I managed to open it. He gave up, but another guy stepped out and followed me. When I tried to go down the stairs, he blocked the way. "Why you gotta be rude?" He was slurring and weaving around, obviously hammered. I apologized and said that I had to go. My friend was waiting for me. I held up my buzzing phone to show him. It was then that I noticed blood dripping onto the ground in front of him. When I looked to see where it was coming from, I saw that he had blood-soaked paper towels wrapped around his hand. What happened? I don't know why I kept this conversation going. I just wanted out. I'm an idiot. He just shrugged, held up his bloody hand and said in the most nonchalant voice I've ever heard, "I got shot." "Why don't you go to the hospital?" I asked, and immediately regretted it, because he looked at me like I was stupid, which in fairness he wasn't wrong. "Give me your number. You can come over here next time." He pulled his phone out of his pocket. I thought about giving him a fake one, but I wasn't about to push my luck. As soon as he got the digits, he called to make sure my phone would ring. He was satisfied when he saw it ring, and only then did he let me go down the stairs. I fled to my truck shaking. After a few moments, I called Chris and asked him where his apartment was. And when he told me, I looked at the buildings and could just make out that I was one building off. I had the floor and apartment location right, just not the building. I made it up to his apartment, looking behind me the whole time, and told him what had happened. At that point, I was trying not to get weepy. He helped a lot because when I finished telling him what had happened, he laughed at me. That was stupid, which it was, but at the time, it just made me mad. So I went home in a huff. We didn't hang out much after that. I know I keep throwing in there how stupid I was. I can't emphasize this enough. This was completely my fault for not being aware. It could have been completely avoided had I just used my brain. It was sheer luck that something worse didn't happen that night. The guy did call me several times and I never answered. He gave up after a while, but I changed my number just to be safe. I never saw him again. I hope he eventually got medical attention. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with, at the time, one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home. This night, however, she ended up staying at her place, heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late, usually watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact that my neighbors tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms and the kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple living in a smaller mill house. They were constantly coming out to our door asking for handouts. Now normally, I would be happy to help out a neighbor, but they would come over and ask for crazy stuff, like us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water, because theirs got shut off, beer, and once literally to ask for a single dollar. They would constantly be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door people to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch when I heard a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who was knocking. It was 11 p.m. I checked the people and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally, I would just walk away and continue with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to come over here and see if you would film my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring here in my pocket and I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me. Baffled but curious, I told him congrats and that I would be out in a second. I just needed to put shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. And quickly, I ran to the back room that looked out into their backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No signs of decorations or anything like that. Naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Yeah, forget that, she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend had started banging on it. I looked through the people again. I couldn't see anything and was confused all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the people. I quickly turned around and put my back up against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and sat up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't overreacting. We went out to our back door and hopped into her car so we could do a drive-by. They always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see inside of their house. Slowly, we crept by in her car and peered into the living room. Sitting on the couch and all, staring at the wall, they looked strung out. It was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again. One day I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me and got out of the car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her that I hadn't seen them for a while and she informed me that she was the owner. She told me that they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed, needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall, and literal crap on the floor. I told her that I was sorry to hear that she had to deal with all that, but I was happy that they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad I didn't follow him into the backyard. This happened a long time ago. I'm guessing back in 2006. And I can't have been older than 4 years old at the time. Yet I vividly remember the fear I felt during this encounter. It was an early summer morning and the sun was up, but few people were out. In fact, these streets were practically dead that morning. My mom decided to take my sister, only 1 year old at the time, seated in a stroller, and I, to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 when this happened, the memories from the incident had faded a lot. However, my mom remembers all of it. She says that upon entering the station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know why I was scared. I guess I could sense my mom's fear. Walking along that secluded garbage station, my mom suddenly stopped and told me this. Hold onto the stroller as hard as you can and don't let go, no matter what. That's my most vivid memory I have of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood had turned to ice. I just froze. My mom sounded stern, but even a toddler can sense when someone's scared out of their mind. My mom was definitely afraid of something. The rest is just a blur. I don't remember much apart from the aforementioned, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my abilities, but in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual. A lot of truck drivers stopped to rest by the side of the road. But this man was staring, and he wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with the determined gaze of a predator. Gluing the three of us in his sight, he truly seemed pleased by the fear he had instilled on our faces. And his eyes, they were something else, almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather to a predator on the savannah. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion, and I couldn't move. And that's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way that he licked his lips, almost as if to say, I could kill you all if I wanted to. I believed this was the point in time, into this strange encounter, when my mom told me to hold on to the stroller, to hold on tightly and not let go. My mom is a small woman, 160 centimeters, weighing only about 48 kilograms, and she could easily have been overpowered by the overweight man in the truck. My mom later admitted she was afraid he would jump out of the truck and knock her out, possibly assaulting her, or even taking me and my younger sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as quickly as my mom could do with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler at her side. We never talked about what happened that day, up until very recently. The incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, as that weird thing that happened when I was a kid. And every time I walk past that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened around 2006. Fast forward to 2008. The face of a 10-year-old little girl called Engla was printed across the front page of every newspaper in sight. She had been kidnapped and murdered, and the perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Öcklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. Anders Öcklund was charged with the murder of Engla, alongside the murder of a woman named Pernilla. And he's also suspected of abducting another little girl who's still currently missing, making him more than one thing. My mom says that when she saw Öcklund's picture in the paper, when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew that he was the creepy man from the garbage station that early morning all those years ago. Thinking how my mom or my sister or me, or all of us could have been his victims, that sends chills up my spine. Anders, even though you're behind bars, let's never meet again.